It's loading. All right, I think we're live.
Cool beans. All right. Let's just see that. Cool beans. All right. Do you want to wait a couple minutes just to get some folks in, or just want to get things rolling?
Let's just roll.
All right. Yeah. Let's get the cringe out of the way first. All right. So you guys remember for the draft show, did that little spoof off of God, I feel like Michael Scott doing his song parodies. But draft show was Samurai Jack, and this one is going to be something else. So let's get the cringe out of the way.
Yeah, beer is necessary.
That's right. Nico, Jack, and even Mac Black. These were the ingredients chosen to create the perfect hockey team. But GM Fitzgerald accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction: chemical Alexi. Thus, the Devil's Dynasty was reborn. Using their ultra superpowers, Heisher, Blackwood, and Lil Jizzy have dedicated their lives to getting pucks deep and taking it one shift at a time.
Well done, Ian. That's fantastic. And has there ever been a more unfortunate nickname than Little Jizzy? Not to my knowledge.
No, I mean hockey nicknames are pretty rough in general.
Yeah. Hey, do you remember that time we awkwardly asked the general manager of the Spokane Chiefs if Ty Smith has a nickname, and he was silent for about 30 seconds before responding? I remember that. Yeah. I think about that sometimes in the shower.
Yeah.
I think about that interview a lot. I think I said a couple really dumb things, but what are you going to do?
Well, it wasn't that bad.
There have been worse. I've had interviews where people have actually gotten extremely mad at me, and that one was fine.
Yeah.
But thanks for that intro, and welcome everyone to the Devils in the Details Draft Lottery live stream. The actual draft lottery starts, so they say, at 8 p.m. So we're going to hang out for about an hour, talk about hockey and some other things, I guess, and Powerpuff Girls, of course. Yeah. And then we'll pivot to the actual draft lottery, which will stream on this channel as well. So stick around. We'll be here probably till like 8:30 or 9, I think. It depends on how long they drag out the actual proceedings, but yeah, I'm excited to be here. How you feeling, Ian? I can't help but feel that we used up our luck last year.
I think so. Yeah, it's kind of, well, I'm not going to start the movie just yet. I'll start at like 20 minutes or so, but it's also kind of frustrating that we're here again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But hey, go in with this with no expectations, except for the fact that we'll be in a position to get a really good player.
Yeah. We're going to go through our top 15 lists for the draft and some of the draft lottery odds and scenarios there. But I think the process of trying to create a top 15 list actually made me feel better about the fact that we're probably, in all likelihood, going to move down from 6 to at least 7, just by the numbers. But having seen the players that are probably going to be available actually makes me feel like it's not the worst thing in the world. Even though, like, it's funny, I keep on seeing polls on Twitter from Devils fans asking, like, where do you think we're going to end up? And overwhelmingly, everyone votes top 3, even though it's basically it's like the inverse of the actual draft lottery odds, which we'll see in a sec. But I love how New Jersey fans can both be eternally pessimistic and like obnoxiously optimistic at the same time.
It's like, the beautiful duality of mankind.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. As we mentioned, here's kind of the general layout for the show.
These slides. Well done.
Good stuff. Yeah, we're gonna hang out for like an hour. We'll pivot at 8 to the actual draft lottery itself, and then we'll either
Assuming it's
break
done
out
by 8:30.
the champagne
Yeah.
or the, I don't know, vodka.
Yeah, I actually do have some champagne, but I'm saving it for, well, I shouldn't say on air.
Yeah, we'll leave that be.
Yeah.
We'll leave. I won't touch that one. Um, so yeah, here's what we're looking at in terms of cold, heartless numbers. Is 7.5% chance of the first overall pick, 7.8% chance at seconds, 8.0 for third, and we're currently sitting at 6, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 6, and we have a 16% chance to stay there. And overwhelmingly, the most probable result is we move down one spot to 7th, and then 8th or 9th. 9th in particular, I'm going to be really mad about if we move down 3 slots, even though I'm sure that's really obnoxious to say, especially if you're hearing this as like a Colorado Avalanche fan, Detroit, like all those teams that have just Vancouver that every year get bumped down 3 spots, and we've won 2 draft lotteries in the past 3 years. So I probably shouldn't say that, but I'd be pretty mad, especially considering it's a 2% chance, right?
Yeah. Let's just hope that honestly, I'm not going to be selfish. Clearly, we want number 1, but
Yeah.
I would be fine settling for 8% chance. Statistics never got in the way of a good time. If anything, we've learned from the recent timeline that, heck, if the Caps can win the Stanley Cup, if the Blues can win the Stanley Cup, if the Cubs can win the World Series, anything is possible.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But I'm just worried that in terms of the hockey context, that means that eventually, like the Buffalo Sabres are going to win or something, or like the Ottawa Senators, where it's like that's the impossible. Like the team that tried so hard to get Connor McDavid is just finally going to get their thing, even though they have worse chances than we do.
Mm-hmm.
What I heard a quote at work the other day. It's like all statistics are lies, but some statistics are useful. Something like that.
Oh no, that's a Mark Twain quote. I think there's lies,
that...
there's damn lies, and then there's statistics.
There you go. So like, don't even pay attention to this, even though it's the cold reality of math. I choose to disregard it.
It's like those. It's like that joke. There is a chemist, and I don't know the second one. I'm not gonna. There's a chemist and an economist stuck on an island, and they all have a can of soup that they need to open, but they don't have a can opener. So the chemist says, all right, let me build a fire and let's try and break this out. And the economist says, suppose we had a can opener. They're trying to rationalize irrational human behavior.
Yeah, that's good. It's also not terribly confidence-inducing when you forget the second line of the joke.
Yeah.
As you start. I love that. I love that so much.
But you just gotta just run through it.
Yeah, you just gotta barrel through it.
Because do we really care about the details here on this show?
It's not on this show. Certainly not. Anything else to say about the odds? I feel like it kind of speaks for itself. In reality, I've thought a lot about that 23.3% chance of being in the top 3.
Yeah.
And especially the amount of debate I've heard around who's going to be in the top 3. And like, I know it's likely, Alexis Lafreniere, Quentin Byfield, and Tim Stützle. But the amount of talk I've heard about Tim Stützle in particular, potentially being the second best prospect and going second, or even in, some sort of bizarre world going first over Lafreniere. It's interesting to think that if you just get one of those 3 spots, you're guaranteed to get one of those 3 like really impact players.
Yeah, game changers. And 23% is not insignificant.
It's not. I mean, it's certainly not 38.9%, but again, we can definitely disregard that.
That's right.
You want to talk a bit about your list, Ian? Because I thought this was really interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like that third tier is a little too much, There could be some more separation in there. I still think Lafreniere's in a league of a tier of his own. He's an extremely decorated prospect. I mean, he's won they've announced the CHL Player of the Year, right? This year, yeah, it was him, and last year as well, and I think he was also best forward at the World Juniors tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I'm mistaken on that, definitely first team All-Star, but I think he was best team. Basically, he's coming into this with about as decorated of a resume as you can get, minus a Memorial Cup.
Yeah,
And
that's basically it.
yeah, and a QMJHL championship for that matter. But you know, things happen, and that's not on him. And also, I mean, Connor McDavid never won a Memorial Cup either. So I mean, that's getting a little too off. But long story short, with Lafreniere, he reminds me a lot of a prior Rimouski Oceanic pick that went first overall. Not Crosby, but Vinny Lecavalier.
Nice. Yeah, I like that.
Little history bomb right there. And then I still have Byfield as the second because I think his ceiling is unbelievable. He's a little raw still, in my opinion. I feel like this is not the best way to sell him for those that are learning about these prospects, but there is a little bit of caution with his game in the sense of when we picked Zaka. Yeah.
Here it comes.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was just the idea of he's got all this skill and all this physicality and this just stature and skating, and can the two come together? Now, Byfield is a lot more polished and a lot more put together than Zaka was during his draft year, and I think his ceiling is much higher. His ceiling is absolutely a 1C franchise center.
Yeah, something interesting about Byfield too, like that Zaka comparison is really interesting, but Zaka used his body much more effectively in terms of physical play in his draft year, whereas Byfield is massive. Like what he's at least 6'2", right? If not 6'3".
He's 6'4".
6'4".
Well,
but he doesn't.
The you know.
Yeah, and he's one of the youngest people in this draft class.
Yeah,
and he doesn't use his body in the same way. No. So like the success he's having isn't because he's that big. It's because he's that skilled. And when the rest of it comes into play, you're like you said, you're going to have a really complete player.
Yeah. So I mean, if anybody in this top three has quote unquote bust potential, it's because of that not coming together. And that's really not fair to Byfield because he's a remarkable talent. And I think whoever's going to pick him is going to be very lucky. But yeah, that's a really good point too about not physically dominating opponents.
And he could, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He's massive.
Yeah.
But yeah, he that's not where his success comes from, which I think is really important, right? Because I mean, you've seen it all the time, like Lawson Krause, Pavel Zaka. I'm ashamed to say, like there are examples of players that can dominate in junior because they are so much more physically mature.
Yeah.
But that advantage tops out, right? Once you hit the professional leagues.
Yeah.
So you need to have more than that. And I think Byfield, like you said, his ceiling is insane. So I agree with having him too, but I know there are lots of people at this point that might disagree with you.
Yeah. I know that I can't think off the top of my head. I know Cam Robinson from, I think he's with Dauber, has Byfield at 1 over Lafreniere, simply based on the potential ceiling. And I get that argument, but politely disagree. And then there's some folks that have Byfield behind, who I have 3, Tim Stutzel. We have him as a left wing here. I think he can go either way. I like him better on the wing right now. He kind of reminds me of a more offensively, I know this is a really vague term, but he reminds me of a more offensively dynamic Sebastian Aho from the Hurricanes, not the Islanders' Sebastian Aho.
The good one.
Yeah. And there's a lot. I mean, he's an exciting player to watch. We got to see that at the World Juniors with Germany playing for. And I don't really have much to say other than he's exciting. He's fast. He's a great playmaker. And his goal is to make the NHL next year. So that'll be really, really exciting. Yeah.
What about that third tier? Do you see a huge difference between like a Lucas Raymond and a Jack Quinn?
Not really, to be honest. I was very tempted to put Rossi at 4, but I just think Raymond's ceiling is a little higher. It may not be as likely that he gets there, but I see a lot of Panarin in his game. Great playmaker, great stick handler. We'll see what happens where he goes, because it's always a little difficult to tell with young kids, because they're kids, like 17, 18-year-old, that's still a kid,
Young boys.
Yeah. Playing in the Swedish Hockey League, the professional league, because a lot of times these kids don't get all that much ice time, and it just depends on the situation. So it's tough to get a good gauge on it, but I'm still very high on Raymond. Now, I know a lot of people might disagree with that. That's cool. I'm fine with that.
Well, I saw something on Twitter today from Scott Wheeler at The Athletic, and he said, talking to some NHL scouts, NHL scouts, or at least some of the ones he's talked to, are, in his words, like a lot lower on Raymond than Twitter seems to be, which I thought was really interesting because, like you said, he is one of those prospects at the top of this draft that does have, I'd say like elite or like borderline elite potential. And the thought that he would belong closer to like pick number 10 than pick number 3 or 4 was really interesting to me because I don't necessarily see that. But at the same time, he didn't really earn a ton of ice time in the SHL this year.
Yeah.
But he's also like 17, 18 years old. So that's pretty typical.
Exactly. But also at the same time, I mean, there's a ton of other players who made significant arguments to be ahead of him with their performances this year. And the prime example of that would be Marco Rossi, who I have at 5. Just a fantastic player. His head coach, likened his game style to Nico Hischier, which is enough for us to like.
I'm in. I mean, we've been on the Marco Rossi train for quite some time now. Incredible player, led the CHL in scoring this season.
Yeah,
also
over 2 points per game, right?
Yeah, 120 points in like 50 odd games. He also happens to be 5'9".
Yeah,
so there's that. But I'm not necessarily sure how much that matters because, he's got that incredible lower body strength. And he's also very mean on the ice, which surprised me when I saw him play in person, because I think I had built up this image of my mind, especially with like the Nico Hischier comparison.
Yeah.
Like Nico's such a nice boy. Like he's very polite. He'll take the puck from you, but he won't do it in like a terribly mean way. Rossi has a bit of like that, I don't want to say Brad Marchand streak, but something like that. Like he could be really nasty.
Yeah. But incredibly, very, very high ceiling. And if there's size concern, shift him to wing. He'll be a really good defensively capable winger and also be able to score points. Nothing. If it wasn't for Stutzel, I could see Rossi going with 3rd overall. It depends on who's picking, but this tier is very close together.
Can you tell me about Jake Sanderson? Because this has been a wild experience for me, because I wasn't the biggest fan of his game a month ago, and now people are talking like he has the potential to go top 5.
Yeah,
depending on if you like him as much as a Marco Rossi, but you happen to need a defenseman. The thought that he could jump to like a number 5 or 6 slot instead of like a Jamie Drysdale is interesting to me.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm a little. I'm not as high on Sanderson, but I also still view him as he's still quite a good prospect nonetheless. I mean, it's just the expectations that you're going to have from him.
Yeah.
When you watch him play, you immediately recognize that he's a very athletic player, and he skates very well, rock solid on defense. But the question is his offensive upside. And I think, honestly, if you're going to use a top 5 pick on a defenseman, I think that player should be able to have top pairing upside. And I think there's a difference between a player that has top pairing upside and a player that can be minute munching on the defensive side of things that can play on the top pair.
So you think he's more the minute muncher than
Yeah,
necessarily like a true top pairing defenseman?
yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is such a cop out, but of course we'll see what happens.
Mhm.
He's committed to go to North Dakota, I think. So we'll see what happens there. But at this point, I mean, I think he's going to get picked top 10 just because of how safe of a player he is. He has a very high floor. Very much reminds me of like a Charlie McAvoy, not in terms of play style. If we're doing play style, I see a lot of Ryan McDonough out of him, but situation wise, I see a lot of Charlie McAvoy in him, in the sense that give him 2 years, maybe 3, he'll be in your top 4 by then.
Yeah, and his skating is so good too, right? Like
Yeah,
that's definitely something I could recognize, and I'm not that smart. But it was just the rest of it where I didn't necessarily see the offense. And you know, as a defenseman, there's more to your game than offense, obviously. But when you're talking about someone being able to be in that kind of top 5, top 6, you know, hell, I think I even saw some comments in the Black Book from hockeyprospect.com that said like some people would even think about taking him like 4th or 3rd. Like some people really like this guy. And my worry is that that word you used, safe, comes into play a lot. And I'm not necessarily sure that's how you want to play a top 5 pick. Although I mean, my job isn't on the line at the draft, so that's probably easier for me to say than like a Tom Fitzgerald. But like I look at like a Nikita Okachuk, for example, 2nd-round pick from last year's draft. To me, that was a safe pick, and not necessarily my favorite of the draft. And I realized Shear wasn't here anymore, but that kind of organizational shift to like we used to really swing for it, and then taking a 2nd-round pick that I see as someone safe makes me not worry that we're going to pick him, because I'm not even sure he'll be on the board depending on where we end up tonight. But he's just not my favorite. I should say that.
yeah, I understand that, and I get that. He is, from what I've seen from him, it's very much a good defenseman is one that you don't notice. But he is, there's no doubt that he's a really good prospect. No doubt. And it also, I mean, the contrary to what you just mentioned would be, yes, at the same, I'm going to take the other side just to, you know, have some, some discussion. Yeah. At the same time, though, I mean, a top 5 pick, you need an NHL player out of that. And I think it's kind of a, what's the word? Self-flagellating practice of looking at like revisionist history with draft classes. Because whether we like it or not, I mean, we have a philosophy here, you know, you and me, that you draft BPA. But sometimes you are starved for defensemen. And I could see a team, not Ottawa, because Ottawa's actually got a very nice group of defensemen. Maybe, I mean, if Detroit falls, I mean, that was a comment in the Black Book by a scout, like Sanderson and Moritz Seider, and that's your top pair for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and like we know Detroit isn't scared to swing, right? Or at least Yzerman's Detroit, because Seider kind of came out of nowhere last season.
Yeah.
And that's why they were kind of one of the teams where like they said like if they happened to go to win the lottery and pick first, it wouldn't be out of the question to see a team like Detroit pick even like a Tim Stützle first overall, which is like that's some big brain thinking. But at the same time, like there were a lot of really good players on the board when they took Seider, and he had a really good year. So
had a really good year. I was hoping that he would fall somehow, but I don't know, because we didn't have another 1st-round pick. But
yeah, that'll be interesting. Who else on here do you think is interesting? Like I know like Cole Perfetti is an amazing player.
I was just about to say Cole Perfetti, actually.
Yeah.
I think he's an X factor here. I don't know if he's going to go top 5. Well, that's a really dumb thing to say. I think he could absolutely go top 5 just because he's got a really good offensive flair, and he's got a good offensive read of the game. Not blistering fast, but good on his edges, and an offensive threat, to use another cliche. Like, very much just about every time he steps on the ice, he can make things happen.
Yeah, and he was the runner-up in the OHL scoring title to Marco Rossi on, I would say, not a much worse team, but definitely a worse team. And I did
Well,
some.
I mean, to be fair, though, sorry to interrupt.
No, no, go for it.
There were a lot of worse teams in Ottawa.
Fair, very
Yeah.
fair. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's Ottawa was kind of a unicorn this season and last. But I did some research into this for an article a couple
Yeah,
weeks
you did.
ago, comparing Rossi and Perfetti because um, some people don't like Rossi, and I think that's fair. Like, the size comes into play. His skating isn't immaculate. There are a couple other things, but one of the narratives surrounding Marco Rossi was that he scored too many of his points against bad teams. And that was interesting to me. So I went and looked at the numbers and compared Rossi with Perfetti, and I also did Byfield, but that didn't make the article. Um, and Rossi's production definitely did drop off from playing against poor teams to good teams. And Perfetti's goal scoring actually increased against good teams, which I thought was hilarious because he had less of a supporting cast, and he actually managed to increase his offense against the better teams in the OHL. So that's really interesting to me because um, that suggests to me that he's very much a play driver, which is just something you want in a top 10 pick. And the thought that a player like Perfetti could be available at 8 or 9, like, that's basically the person I'm thinking of when I think that, like, even if the Devils drop 1, 2, maybe even 3 spots today, we're going to be fine because there's going to be a kid like Perfetti available. Maybe not him, because I think, like you mentioned, he has the potential to go as high as 5 or so. But there are definitely players like that.
Yeah. I think I should also mention 2 other players here. I really do like Anton Lundell.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I just see him and I think Minnesota Wild, even though the Wild are not going to be in a position to draft him.
Yeah, no, that's
But
that's a very fair thing though, because, like, he's got that defensive edge to him.
yeah,
He's a bit unorthodox, and he's already kind of cut his chops against men, right? Because he
yeah,
was playing professional this year in Finland.
he's,
That's a
he's got
really
a very
interesting.
good wrist shot too.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
I
not
like
just
that a lot.
defensive. Yeah. Um, so yeah, he's a really interesting prospect to follow. The other guy that I wanted to mention was Noel Gunler. I have him at 14. Um, this is one of those, again, like, I wasn't sure where to put him just because he does have very high upside, but I don't
Mhm.
think it's quite. I don't see the likelihood of him reaching that upside as high as the others on this list.
So more of a boomer bust kind of guy.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
One thing I have to ask you about, and I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but there's one person I don't see on this list that others might expect to see.
Maybe I
Um,
forgot. Okay.
a goalie, Askarov.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
No, no,
yeah.
no. This is good because I'm not good with evaluating goalies.
Mhm.
Um, hmm.
Because there are some people that say he's a top 10 pick,
Yeah.
and then others, like, I'm not sure anyone doubts his ability. It's more a consideration of risk versus draft position. Because
Yeah.
I was a guest on a podcast last week, and basically said, like, I think he's talented. Like you, I have no idea about goalies, but smart people that I trust tell me that he's talented. But at the same time, I think the only place where I would take him would be so far into the draft that he wouldn't be available. Like, basically, like, late teens, early 20s, that sort of thing. Um, that's kind of where I sit, but he's definitely well thought of.
Yeah. I would say that he was very much on my mind when writing this or when making this list, just because it is uh, important to know that he is one of the most, um, I say, hyped. Not to diminish his skill, but
Mm.
just to say that how much fanfare he's had since his development or over the path of his development. He's probably the most hyped goaltending prospect since Carey Price. Um,
Wow. Yeah. No, I could see that though. Like,
So last year we had Spencer Knight
mhm.
get drafted by the Panthers. What was that, 10th overall?
uh, yeah, it was within the top 15.
That's fair. Within top 15. It has not been very often though that
Mhm.
teams drafting um, goalies in the first round have found success, but that's not to hold him. What am I saying? That's not to be held against him for the
Yeah.
sins of goalies past.
Yeah. Yeah. He's very athletic. His performances to date have been excellent, barring maybe the World Junior Championship where he didn't do all that well. But
Yeah, and that's a 6-7 game tournament.
yeah.
People put a lot of stock into that, which is fair because it's the first time a lot of folks get to see these international prospects
Mhm.
or that play in the Russian leagues. But I mean, at the same time, though, you could also point to last year, Askarov just absolutely stonewalling at the U18 championships, the best U.S. national development program team assembled to date.
Yeah.
Um,
I wonder how thrilled Jack Hughes would be to see him if the Devils draft him. It's like, you again. But yeah, no, that's fair. How far out of the top 15? Like, how far off of this
he's
list do
knocking
you
on the
think?
door here. I would say 16 or 17.
Okay, that's fair. Very fair. Anyone else on this list that you want to talk about? I'm
Um,
curious about Jack Quinn because he's interesting to me too. He's
yeah,
another of the 67s.
Jack Quinn is a really fun player to watch. Awesome goal scorer. Developed some kind of power forward game. The biggest question I have, though, is, and this is probably not fair just because of how stacked Ottawa was, but he spent most of his time against second pairing defensemen and whatnot. So Rossi, excuse me, Rossi and his line took the brunt of the top defensive assignments.
Mhm. Do you think Jack Quinn is a top 20 pick this year
Yes.
if Graham Clark isn't injured,
Oh,
for
that's a
Ottawa?
good question.
Because it seems like he really took the spot that all of us thought Graham Clark would have, right? Like I think Clark scored like 9 goals in his first like 6 or 7 games,
Yeah,
and then
he
had that shoulder injury.
celebrating a goal. What a champ. Um,
Yeah,
that's a
I'm
good
just
question.
curious,
I
because
still think so. Yeah, I still think so. Maybe the later, much closer towards 20, just because there wouldn't be that much exposure. But I still think so because the skill comes through.
oh yeah, and it's amazing to see someone take advantage of that opportunity. It's just his goal totals jumped so
Yeah,
much from last season to this season, but he
absolutely
obviously had an
insane.
opportunity open up in front of him and took advantage, which is
Yeah,
that's exactly what you're supposed to do, right? People get
yeah.
injured in hockey all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's interesting. And like talking about need, like one thing this team needs, the Devils, is a volume shooter, a
Yep.
goal scorer, and a right wing.
Yeah.
So we know the Devils have seen a lot of the 67s because they basically have half the team. I'm curious how high Quinn is on the list.
Yeah. So that is my top 15. If anybody here has any questions, as in like the chat or whatnot, because we've got almost 30 people watching.
Oh,
Holy
nice.
heck.
I'm glad this worked because last year we tried to stream to YouTube and failed miserably.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got it working this year.
So it's funny because we actually we had our own little stream of Zoom, which was
Yeah,
very much ahead of our time, apparently.
yeah, we were early adopters. We're the Zoom hipsters.
That's right. We did it before everybody else did, guys. Okay.
Yeah,
And I'm sorry, just one more thing. I keep interrupting you, Duncan.
yeah.
Before we move on, I just want to mention to everybody that, we're very privileged to be able to do this and, be able to set aside a couple hours to talk about hockey and just react to it. But, we've been keeping a bit of a radio silence just because we wanted to. There are more important things happening right now. And I just want to let all of you know that in our description, we don't do this for money, you know, but in our description, for the YouTube video, there are some links for local food banks. The Feeding America one is you can put in your zip code and find a local food bank to donate. The food pantries one is one more towards where I'm at, and if you can, like $1, maybe $2 goes a really long way if you can. If you're, yeah, just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I think that's important. And you're right, like there have been much more important things than hockey going on. So yeah, if you have the ability, that's greatly appreciated. I did see a question in the chat from who was it? Dean? Dean on YouTube about Rodion Amarov. And I
Yeah,
think that's a perfect segue to my top 15 list
hey,
because he
let's see
sneaks
it.
in there um, in kind of the third tier. He's a really interesting player that I like a lot. Now, I think there might be some hot takes on this list, so you'll have to bear with me. But
I'm ready.
I see him as one of those kind of 10 to 20 picks, and there's a lot of players in there that are probably interchangeable. Um, but yeah, this is where I land, and I think it's pretty similar until like pick 9 to your list, and that's kind of where things take a right turn, which probably means there's a few things wrong here. But um, I did put Sanderson here, even though my personal opinion isn't necessarily as positive as others. I love Seth Jarvis, and I saw you had him on your list as well. But yeah, Amarov is a player that I think is really intriguing. Coming out of Russia, that does a lot of things really well. I think his transition game is really cool. And I also snuck another German onto this list at the end, Lucas Reichel,
He's a
because there's
fantastic
right
skater.
there's three big Germans in this draft, and they're probably all first round picks. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I
AJ
think so.
Paterka is probably also a first rounder.
I think so.
But Lucas Reichel, I think, is really interesting. Um, but yeah, this is where I end up. I think we're basically the same until 9, if not exactly the same. Maybe Holtz and Drysdale or switch or something. But um, yeah, Seth Jarvis in particular, I think is interesting because he had like a really dominant season in the WHL. And I was like reading and watching some stuff from Will Scouch at Scouching about Seth Jarvis, and he said he basically does one thing well, but he does it insanely well, which is pass to high danger areas on the ice. He isn't necessarily a person that um, takes a ton of high danger shots. He does go to the middle of the ice, which is good, but the sheer volume of passes he makes to high danger areas is just outrageous. So I think that's an interesting habit to have because sometimes you see prospects that are very efficient, um, but don't necessarily push the pace of play to like those high danger areas. And I think it's interesting that Jarvis is up there. I think JJ Paterka, like the third German that didn't make the cut, is one of those more like efficient players that is probably much more safe than they are um, dynamic, I guess. Those are all kind of hockey buzzwords that I'm not sure actually mean anything at this point, but we'll use them anyways. But Jarvis is definitely one of those guys that really pushes it. Um, I also included Askarov because, I don't necessarily know any better, and that's where people have him. So I didn't want to push him out just because of my lack of opinion. And Braden Schneider, I think, is an interesting defenseman as well. Although I imagine that once you get past Drysdale and Sanderson, there are probably 2 or 3 other defensemen that you could take realistically in the teens, and it's probably just team preference at that point. But there are some of them that I think are much more risky than others. Anything here that pisses you off, Ian?
um, we do have exactly the same top 5. I think
Yeah,
top 6.
and I have to admit it was painful for me to put Rossi behind Lucas Raymond,
Yeah,
just because of my personal affection for him.
and
But
also, sorry.
no, I think it's just I think it's true that Raymond does have a higher ceiling, and in a weird way, and this is strange to say about a player that's 5'9", he might be the safer pick between the
Yeah,
two. in a strange way. Because I think you're right. I think if center doesn't work out because of size, you could easily put him to the wing, and he'd be a really interesting playmaking, defensively responsible, pain in the ass winger. Um, so I don't know. Raymond does seem like if he weren't to hit his ceiling, he might be a less useful player.
I'm right there with you. I had to think a lot to put Raymond in front of Rossi, just because Rossi, like we said earlier, he's got the smarts, he's got the defensive acumen, he's got the lower body strength, and he's got the ability to just rack up points.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question in chat about Jamie Drysdale. If we think he's built in Quinn Hughes's mold, that's interesting because I've heard people give warnings about Drysdale. Not that he's a bad player, but to say that if you expect Quinn Hughes or Cale Makar, you might walk away disappointed. Do you think that's fair?
Um, that is a tough question. I think there's definitely a lot of projection of Cale Makar on Drysdale just because of his skating ability and how he just kind of gallops around the ice. And Quinn Hughes is more of like a water bug, I think. We're being really pedantic here.
Well, that's what it always comes to, right? Because you know, I feel like it is very subjective. I mean, if you do what Will Scouch does and start to really crunch the numbers, I think you can start to move past that a little bit. But when it comes to actual descriptive words, it's absolutely pedantic. But I do think he is a bit different than a Quinn Hughes. I'm trying to think of like a comparable that actually comes to mind because I feel like his skating ability is in a different mold than like a Cale Makar or even a Hughes because he's just extremely efficient. I don't know, like he isn't necessarily going to like blow you away with his skating, but it's just like to me at least, and like when I've seen him come through town, has been basically immaculate. If not like pull you out of your seat, he just gets it done. And I saw like when I've seen him, he's made very good decisions with the puck. I've heard that that's not always the case, but I do love him for that.
Yeah. Dean in the chat has a really good segue to our next couple slides, but I do want to quick address something that a question was asked about water bug, which is one of my vague, broad tendencies, slang words, and what I mean by water bug is just kind of like a Sam Girard type player where he's very, he's not quite as powerful with his skating, his straightaway speed, but his angles and his east-west ability is excellent, and he uses that a lot to kind of like zip around, so to speak.
Yeah, like just like one of those creepy bugs on the water, right? They're just zipping around. You can't quite pin them down. I think that's fair. We do have a hot take alert or a potential one from John in chat. I'd say Stutzel for need and talent at 2. I get the feeling Byfield ends up closer to Evander Kane than to Evgeny Malkin. I think that's interesting.
That's an interesting one. I think Kane is a lot meaner of a player than Byfield. I mean, then again, Malkin's a mean player too.
He's not a saint.
No,
definitely not.
By the way, this is not any kind of hot take or anything, but angry Evgeny Malkin is, I think, the best hockey player in the league.
Angry Evgeny Malkin when Crosby's injured.
Yeah. Like, that's when the stars align.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Did you want to take a look at some of the sleeper picks? Because I think I saw a name in chat that might be on my list. But.
Yeah, maybe. But also, I mean, it should also be important to note that this is a very forward-heavy draft. So it's always difficult to try and gauge the ceiling of these defensive players or defensemen when compared to, there's 12 forwards and 3 defensemen that we have in our top 15. I mean, minus Askarov.
Yeah.
So it's a balance of finding the actual ceiling versus, okay, shit, we really need a defenseman.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? Like there's value and then there's comparative value, right? You don't want to take the third best defender at like pick 11 or 12
Mhm.
if there are 8 forwards that would provide you better value
Yeah.
until you get to like where that defenseman should actually be picked. The problem is everyone has a different list and a different definition of value and different criteria to measure value in the first place. So um, I think that question about like if the defensemen are overhyped because there are so few of them, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. And I don't know if that's just my personal bias against Jake Sanderson coming into play. But you know, that does happen. Like we see that all the time, right? And you see it with centers too, where, you know, a center that has less of a impact potential being picked above wingers that have much higher ceilings. And I'm not just talking about Barrett Hayton.
Yeah, or
There's
the old
tons of
Dylan
examples.
McElrath principle.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So tell me about these guys, Ian, because
Yeah,
there are some very interesting names on this list.
yeah. So I'll start. I mean, I'll do a quick rundown. Just a couple major names that I'd like to hit. Um, First off, I would two things to note. I accidentally put Jack Thompson as a center when he's a right defenseman. So just to clear that up. So that was my mistake. The other thing is I wasn't sure whether or not to put Evan Vierling on this list just because I don't think he's going to be on the board by the 4th round or so. But I'll just talk about 2 players or three players then. Dmitry Ovchinnikov is, I mean, he's played in all kinds of forward positions. He played center a lot for his team in the MHL. I listed him here because I genuinely don't know where he's going to get picked. He on NHL Central Scouting's or the Central Scouting's European list, the final for the European skaters, he was not on that. Um,
Interesting. Like not
yeah,
even listed.
not even listed. So so we'll see. But just an excellent playmaker, very good skater, excellent playmaker. A lot of room to improve. That's why these are sleeper picks, especially in his defensive game. But the offensive skill is there. Um, Briefly, Evan Vierling, fantastic two-way defenseman, or excuse me, two-way center. Very complete game. It's um, a huge percentage of his points were primary points. So I that's why I wasn't sure about listing him here because I don't think he's going to last past the 3rd round. Michael Benning is to you again. This feels like a lazy comparison, but I'll explain. Very much like a Cale Makar type defenseman, I think, not in the skill level, but the idea that he's a defenseman from the AJHL that's just a really good skater, and he uses that to his offensive ability. Um, the biggest one that I have on this list, the the big name here for me would be Isaac Phillips. That's the kind of like the real X factor here, because Phillips is a big guy, very raw in his game. He had a very large growth spurt over the past year or so, and he's still a very strong skater, very strong. But if he can put that together, I think he could absolutely be a second pairing defenseman. And I put Berezovkin because I do like a good power forward. It is fun to watch. It's just a mean, physical player.
Very nice. Yeah, no, I think that's a nice list, and it's funny because I feel like in the later rounds, the Devils, and we talked about this last summer, Ian, when we did our piece on Nikola Patrick, but they have this kind of type where there are players that have a couple different really raw tool sets, and they can develop in a few different roles. But I don't know if your list is anything like mine, but when I put together my sleeper picks, a lot of the players I put on that were not like that at all, where they had a couple of really interesting skills and they needed to kind of, get their butt in gear to work on either their skating or their decision making or whatever. But I feel like, at least with Yeah, like even I think about a player like Arseny Gritsuk was a bit more in terms of like he had some really good like mobility skills and he needed to kind of work on the rest. So I feel like the that thought process can still be valid for the Devils, even though they do tend to pick those kind of multi-tool players that just need to basically pick a lane and they can kind of develop in that direction. So
Yeah, and
I
it
like
should
those a lot.
also, sorry, it should also be noted that Gritsuk had a very good international tournament performance.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember watching like a shootout. I think it was Russia versus the US, and he had a really nice move. Anything else you want to say about this list?
well, one other player that I'd like to list would be I forget how you pronounce it, but William Cool, just a very much a. You mentioned the idea of Rossi having like a Marchand type meanness flair to him, not
Sure.
in like a dirty play kind of situation, but just an aggressiveness towards
Sandpaper,
getting the puck. Yeah, sandpaper,
truculence.
truculence. Yeah. uh, Brian Burke is now searching your address or like a
He's the
reverse
patron
IP
saint of
search.
this podcast.
Um, but Coyle is I get like Tom Wilson vibes from him. Just a very just a strong power forward that doesn't take anything, doesn't take any crap. Um,
Nice.
yeah, fun to
I had a
watch too.
couple. I had a couple names on mine. I also had Jack Thompson down as a center by accident. So it's the same warning applies. And I have a couple overagers on here. And when I talk about players that have a couple singular skills and then need to really work on something else, a few of these people have that. Maybe more so than others, Pavel Gogolev, who is not only an overager but a double overager, plays for Guelph in the OHL, and he had a really good year on a Guelph team that's a bit past its prime. And I think he's a player that I think could step into Binghamton next season and be a pretty effective middle six forward, especially as barring some really big moves this summer, there are going to be a couple kind of bubble players moving up and down between Binghamton and New Jersey. He's a player that I think would be really interesting because he's pretty good on his like his balance. Like he's decent at keeping people away from the puck, and he can really shoot it. I see him as a potentially a really useful player that could, maybe in 2 or 3 years sneak into like a middle six, maybe a bottom six role on the Devils. Um, William Villeneuve out of the Quebec League is another one of those players that is he definitely has a single like a one-track mind, very offensively gifted defenseman, along with Poirier out of the Quebec League that I think is really interesting. James Hardy is a player out of Mississauga, and there are actually two steelheads on this list, so you can tell where I live and who I see most often. But Hardy's interesting. He scored like 34 goals this season. Isn't necessarily the biggest play driver. Like his shot is amazing. I wouldn't put it up there with like Quinn or Alexander Holtz, but it is a very good shot. The problem is he doesn't always push the pace of the game and go to the inside of the ice. So I think he's one of those players that if you were to put on like 10 pounds and get just, a bit more courageous, could be like a potentially a really good value pick because he already has this, decent skating. He has the goal scoring ability. If he just adds kind of those peripheral pieces, he could potentially be a very useful player.
And
Um,
if he does make the show or whenever we draft him and he goes through one gate to the other, we could call that a hardy har har.
that might be your worst one yet, and I
Yeah,
say that with only love and affection.
they're only going to get worse.
Yeah, the night is young. Callie Klang is a goalie out of Sweden. That is the closest thing I've seen to Dominic Hasek in a long time because though how aggressive he is out of the net is hilarious, and he has the athleticism to back it up. He's had some interesting international performances. He could be a flyer. Like, the Devils basically take a goaltender every year at the draft, usually in the later rounds these days. He'd be someone that I think would be on the board, round 5, 6, maybe even 7, that could be an interesting value pick if you want to take a swing on a player that still has the potential to grow a couple inches, but has that athleticism and potentially too much bravery for his own good. He'd be an interesting choice. And then the last one,
I had to
sorry,
pause a little bit when you said. I had to pause a little bit when you said, "Yeah, he could be a flyer."
Yeah, no, we don't talk about them on this podcast.
Yeah,
I'm not sure we've ever talked about the Flyers in like 4 years. That's interesting. Last one I'll mention off this list is Bjorkvik Holm, who's another Mississauga Steelhead. He was a high pick in the import draft last season, and he's big. Like he's like 6'2". He doesn't weigh a lot, and he's a bit timid. So he's the kind of guy that has decent mobility. He makes a good first pass. He's got like decent offensive instincts, but he doesn't play like he's 6'2". Like he's just a bit too timid at the moment to play a kind of smaller North American game. So that's a player that I think, would be available at like, round 5-ish, plus or minus 1 round. And if you believe in him and you think you could, impart a bit more sandpaper into his game, could actually have like, third pairing defenseman potential. And in the 5th round, that's about as good as it gets, right? So I think he'd be really interesting.
Yeah. Two quick things. First off, we had a question about Alex Cotton in the chat, so I'll address that second. The first one is, I have the movie playing now.
Nice. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the movie for those who aren't in on it?
Yeah. The things we do for superstition. So, what was the year? It was 2017. I was at my then girlfriend's house, then girlfriend, now wife, hanging out with her parents, and we were watching.
What a flex that is, by the way.
Oh yeah, that's a yeah. Yeah. So we were sitting on the couch, and it was the draft lottery for the 2017 draft, and it was the Nico Nolan thing, that whole thing, and we had this movie playing.
Or mocha, and
it was Assassin's Creed, with the one with Michael Fassbender, and also, so we won it that year. And I was like, all right, that's cool, awesome. 2019 then was last year, and I said, like, hey, what the heck? I'll wear this jersey and put on the movie. And we won it again. I tried to help our friends with the Knicks for their draft lottery, but I put it on the movie and it didn't work. So, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. But also at the same time, it's a different sport. So long story short, it's a really dumb superstition, and we're here.
We're here, Ian, now. That's the only kind of superstition.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
So tell us about Cotton. I'm just going to pull up the lottery stream now, because we should be basically there.
Yeah. Cotton is an overager. And for those that aren't sure, because a lot of times we use these really vague terms, like hockey terms. But basically that means that he was eligible to be drafted last year, and he was passed over by all the teams, but he's still eligible this year to be drafted. And depending on where you are, you can keep being eligible. I think North America, the limit is 3 years. Like if you're 21, you're no longer eligible to be drafted. Regardless, he's an overager, saw a huge increase in his production, very offensive oriented defenseman playing, I think, Lethbridge, right? Yeah. And he's got really good instincts, very strong pass, very good job at moving the puck. I like the way that he shoots. But basically how he can recognize shooting lanes, and more importantly, when he cannot shoot, when the shooting lane is all closed up or whatnot, he'll move the puck around. I'm not too concerned. The 2 points of concern, though, with his game would be his defensive game, which is, that can be coached. That's not a really big deal. Um, just some like brain farts or whatever happen, and that's fine. But the other thing is he's got a big frame, and he's still working on his skating uh, power and just overall agility and movement. So I think that's the big point of improvement for him. But overall, I mean, excellent power play potential, if nothing else improves.
Sorry about that interruption there, Ian.
Oh, it's all good.
We got the stream up. That's interesting, and the whole overager thing is an interesting dynamic because when I first started paying attention to the draft, I was like, why would you take a player that's a year into their development when you can take a bigger swing at a player that has an extra year basically. But for a lot of players, and like I think about Gogolev, like the year he had this season is probably the sort of year you want someone in their draft plus 2 year to have anyways. So like, you can just take him because he's already been through that and had that experience. So that was a weird thing for me to kind of come to grips with.
Yeah, and you can tell the strength of a draft class also by how many overagers are taken the next year.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Are you getting an echo, Duncan, by the way?
No,
I'm not. Somebody in the chat apparently is, so I'm just check my mic and whatnot.
As closely as possible to its intended purpose. Tonight is phase 1. So here are the basics. There are.
Oh, okay, cool. That's been checked. It's in.
There we go.
Yeah,
we're good.
Awesome.
Man, it's going to take them 30 minutes to explain the rules of this lottery.
Yeah.
So in case anyone didn't, no worries, Mike. In case anyone didn't hear, apparently they're going to start drawing the cards, and like we'll know basically immediately if any or how many of those play-in teams have already won. So assuming no play-in teams won, we'll start at number 7. And we'll hope to God that we see the Buffalo Sabres pop up. And if there are 8 cards, that means that 1 play-in team won, 9 cards 2, and 10 cards means the worst possible scenario, and 3 play-in teams have won. And to be honest, I don't even know what's going to happen at that point because there is no, drama to the draw at that point. Because if 3 play-in teams win, the only drama is the order in which the alphabetized teams are arranged, but like we won't know who those are for like a couple months. So I assume if 3 teams win, which is like the worst case scenario, they'll just show us the order. But that doesn't seem like good TV. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's how it is.
Sounds simple, right?
Yeah, I'm not even going to mention what the team is, just because that would be absolute chaos. But apparently, there's a team that has a 1 in like 39,000 chance of winning the first overall pick and winning the Stanley Cup.
Now we won't tell you what that team is, but that was that thread by Mika McCurdy, right?
Yeah, that was the one.
Stats wizard.
Yeah, very interesting stat stuff. But
yeah, Philippe, you can't talk about that team in chat, man.
Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that.
And speaking of the New Jersey Devils,
I still can't believe that they haven't made him the official GM at this point.
Yeah, I think that's going to be. I think that's the right move. No, not. I think the right move will be naming him general manager.
Right. I was like, Ian, what else do you want the man to do?
How dare you?
Well, obviously, it would be a great honor for us. We've been fortunate in the last.
Oh, they're asking Marty, hey, what would it be like to win 3 first overall picks in 4 years?
We'd be so proud.
Yeah, and I will say
so
this.
Hard for it.
Yeah, we worked really hard for this. I will say this. No matter what happens tonight, even, let's just say if we were to win, if they were to win the first overall, we would still be nowhere near the level of ineptitude that Edmonton is.
Ian, I think that's called hedging your bets.
Yeah.
You just did. But it's true. I feel like that's true. Right? Like, I know we're both admittedly Ray Shero fans.
We'll have time to
and we'll
spend
pour one out for him later
time
in the
into
show.
Mickey, and then we'll inoculate
But
to
basically
be
every
ready
move he made
when
last summer
when they
was
get
a
to the
move
NHL. So I
I
think we're in a
specifically
good
thought
spot.
would be
Obviously,
good,
there's a lot of work to
including
do,
PK
and
Subban.
hopefully,
And,
through
Nikita
this draft,
Gusev
hopefully
was
we'll
basically
find
demanded by
more talent that's going
the
to
proletariat.
bring us back
Um,
where we're supposed to
I
to
think the
be
swings he
in
took last
tank for a
summer
Stanley Cup
were
every
definitely
single
smart
year.
ones. They were
All
smart
right,
bets,
exactly
and
what
he
Devils
didn't
fans
spend,
want to hear. Marty,
any
great to
like
see
blue
you.
chips
Good to
to
see you're
get them.
doing well, and good luck tonight.
But,
Thank you so much.
I don't think that's poor management.
Heading into the draft lottery, the Detroit
No,
Red
no,
Wings
because
actually
that
have
was
the second best odds with an
it was a
18.5%
clear gamble. It
chance
was
at
a
the top
clear
spot. And that's because
move
the
that they
Ottawa
were going
Senators,
for
they
it, and it
also
just
own
kind of
San Jose's
collapsed.
selection.
Yeah.
So those two
And
picks right there
I think Kevin,
combine for
your
a
attitude is probably the
25%
correct one.
chance to
That
get
no
the
matter what
first
happens,
pick.
it's going
And
to work
as a
out.
result of
And
this trade,
you
Eric
look at the top
Carlson's the
15 list
Sharks
that we were
now
going over a
possess
couple
a
minutes
San
ago.
Jose's first-round pick,
Even
in
if we
addition
drop
to
all the
its
way to
own.
9,
So if any of
there
these
are some
drawings was
very good
won
players
by San
available,
Jose,
and it's
Yeah.
just going to
Ottawa would
be,
possess the right to
past
that
pick
selection. So thanks to the
5
Carlson
even. It's
trade,
just going to be
Ottawa
a matter of
could end up with
opinion for
multiple
some
picks in the
teams.
top
Yeah.
five.
And all it
That has
takes is
only
for one
happened
team to
4
take,
times in the
a
past
flyer on
40
someone in the
years.
top
The Islanders were the
7,
last
and all
team
of a
to have
sudden we
2
get
picks
a
in the
player
top
that would
5
be
back in
considered to Ian
2000.
and I
And
a
in
top 5
1999,
talent
Brian Burke worked
could
his
drop into your
magic on
lap.
the
So
draft floor
it just
to
takes
bring both
one
Daniel and Henrik
interesting
Sedin
pick,
to
and then that
Vancouver.
cascades all the way down.
I do think there's
Also
going to be
joining us
one
virtually
play-in
representing
team
the
that
6
wins a
NHL
pick.
teams in contention to win the draft
Why,
lottery
why
are
would you say
very
that?
special
Like,
guests,
I,
the first
no,
responders that have been leading us through this COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
not trying to
Representing the
jinx it
Detroit
here.
Red Wings
I'm assuming there
and the
haven't been
Harrison
any
Township
leaks
Fire
because I
Department,
remember last year
firefighter
there
and
was a
medic
leak of
Aaron
that
Simmons.
image of,
In
New
Ottawa is
Jersey,
Kelly Cochran,
New York,
superintendent
and
of the
Chicago,
Ottawa
but we didn't
Paramedic
actually see
Service.
it during the stream.
Representing the
So
LA
we were
Kings
basically
is resident
oblivious, but
physician at NYU Langone Health,
curious. I
Dr.
haven't seen
Jacob
anything.
Hattenbeck. For the Anaheim Ducks, registered nurse Emily White of the Surgical
yeah,
Intensive
yeah.
Care Unit at Mission Hospital. From New Jersey
If,
and the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital is EMT
If
Travis
Buffalo wins it,
Tygens.
I'm going to be really upset.
And from Buffalo, Executive
Yeah,
Nurse
I mean,
Director
Buffalo
of
kind of
Medical
deserves it though
Concierge
too, man.
Services
Like,
at
if
Roswell
if I think of a
Park,
team that's had
Cancer
worse luck,
Center,
like you think about
District
Vancouver and I mean, I don't feel that bad for Colorado, all
Many
things
of the true
considered,
heroes
but
of the
Buffalo's had a
pandemic,
rough
as
couple
they
of
have been
years.
fighting on the front lines for months now, and we'd like to
That's
welcome
fair.
in Kelly Cochran in Ottawa joining us. And Kelly, thank you
I
so
think
much
you
for
were
your
completely
efforts
right, though.
during
They're
this
going to drag
pandemic,
this out as
and
long
thank
as
you
they
so much for
can.
taking the time
And
to
part of me
joining us.
worries
I
that
know
the
we
longer they
looked to
drag it out,
Ottawa
the
potentially
more
put you
play-in
for one
teams have
tonight in
won,
just a
and the more
second, but
time
what
they need
has
to
life
chew up
been
before
like
they
for
get
you
to the
during this
actual reveal,
pandemic?
because
Oh,
there's going to be
that's
nothing to talk about.
Well, it's been
That's
good fun, I
spicy.
think, as it
Yeah.
is for everybody. It's been very busy for me
I'm curious in
personally and for
chat
my
if people
family.
have been
We talk about my
using
double
the
versus bunker
Tankathon
family.
draft
So
lottery simulator and how
I think
often
all I can say
the
is
Devils
it's
have
been
actually come
different
up,
and
because
very,
I
very
ran it a
exciting.
couple
Well,
times
I
today
know
and
in other
I managed
times
to
you
get the
love
number
taking
2
your
pick,
family to
I
Ottawa
feel like 3
Senators
times in a
games. You're
row.
a big
And I
fan.
figured at that
And
point I
of
should
course, there
probably
could be
stop
good
because
news coming for your team
it's not great for
tonight.
my
What would it
anxiety.
mean for Ottawa to win the draft
I mean,
lottery
the
and
best way to
possibly have
use
2 picks
Tankathon
in the top
is
3?
to
Oh, it would give
click
the
it and see if
fans
your team makes a
sort
top
of
3.
hope
If
and
they didn't,
excitement
no,
for the future to have
it's
two
a
draft
warm-up
picks.
run, and then
Yeah,
you
exactly.
It's a
Yeah.
critical win
7.5% of the time. That's exactly
for
correct.
building
I
a
like that.
team
All
to
right,
a
so
franchise
get a load of
winning,
this. All
really.
right, I'm
It
thinking
would mean a lot for the city.
potential
It would mean
merch
a lot for
opportunity
fans
here.
and for me and my family. It's
Already not
definitely a
off
step
to a
in
not
the
good
right
start, but
direction.
here we
Kelly, you
go.
sound
You
like a
ready?
general manager, and I know you follow not just NHL players, but also
If
prospects coming up as well.
it's
So if
contingent
the
on
Senators are going to
2
take the first
conditions here.
overall pick and win that selection,
If
who do you
the
think they
Devils
should
win the
take?
first overall pick,
Well, no surprise. I think it's
assuming
John
we draft
Lanier.
Lafreniere,
He's just
that
an obvious
if that
answer,
happens,
and
and if we
he's a
hire
Canadian talent. He's so talented. He's a Canadian
Laviolette
boy, and we'd
Mhm.
love to have
as
him
head
on our
coach,
team. I'm really happy
you
to
know
see him a
those
medic.
decorations in
I've been rooting
kitchens,
for
usually
him,
southern
but I
kitchens,
can't wait
but
to
usually
see
just
him coming
kitchens
on
in
board
general
for the team.
that have
I was
words
about to say,
on
Kelly,
it,
you're making
like,
me look bad.
you
You
know.
know more about these prospects.
We'll have to
Well,
design
Kelly,
one
thank
of
you
our
so much
own
for
that
all
I
says
know where you're going
live,
with this.
yeah,
and
live,
good luck tonight in
laugh,
the NHL draft lottery.
love.
Hopefully your team
Oh
gets
my
to
gosh,
choose a
that's
high-quality
horrendous in the best way possible. We shouldn't have said that live on air because someone's going to steal that, but that's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I'm just going to run down the odds one last time. I'll pull them up. I won't change the screen sharing because I'm never going to get this back up again. But yeah, Kevin, you're exactly right. 7.5% chance to win the first overall pick. And we'll run down from there.
That's the number. You know? That's the big number.
Yeah. So yeah, 7.5% chance for first, 7.8 for second, 8.0 for third. So a combined 23.3% chance of getting a top three. We have a 16.3% chance to stay where we are at number 6, a 38.9% chance to drop 1, 19.4% chance to drop to number 8, and a 2.1% chance for the worst case scenario to drop all the way to 9th.
Oh, it's Bettman. Boo.
And I'm hopeful that it all comes together very, very quickly.
Yeah, as are all of us and the fans as well. It's
What do
really
you think
been
of the whole
interesting because hockey has
idea
never existed in isolation.
having the
So let's
teams
discuss the two major
start playing in the
societal events
playoffs
of the
again, like
last
having
several
the
months,
season
beginning with that
still?
COVID-19 pandemic.
I mean,
How is
and
the
this
NHL
is
faring
easy
as
for
far
me
as
to
players
say.
returning to their local markets?
I think
As
we're
a
on the
fan
same
of a
page.
team that isn't in the play-ins, I think I don't think it's the right move. It seems pretty irresponsible to me. I get the money part of it, but the amount of money you're going to lose if you start it and have to call it off when someone gets sick.
Yeah.
But again, it's easier for me to say that because my team isn't playing regardless.
And honestly, I mean, we're in a good position too with the cap. I mean, the cap's projected to stay right around what 81.5 for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
That's really good for us. So it's easier to say that. I don't like it. I mean, clearly, I miss hockey. I want it back, but like.
And finally, Commissioner,
I mean, we already have experience with the NHL playing the playoffs through a pandemic back in 1919, and a player died as a result of it.
Yeah.
I
mean,
times
have changed, obviously, but there is that kind of deep conflict of like, I want sports, and you want some semblance of normalcy, but at the same time, like the thought of leaving your family for a couple months to go play in a tournament, it has to be really tough for some people to make. And specifically about you think about the coaches, because it's one thing to consider athletes kind of in their prime, in like peak physical condition, but if you look at the age and physical condition of some of the coaches around the league, they are maybe slightly less protected when it comes to physical ailments. So
what is a very exciting night in the NHL.
Good to be with you once again.
Also, yeah, shout out to Heads Up Hockey. Apparently this is being done in the NHL Network's location in Secaucus.
Yeah, that's why we see so many former Devils in on the draft lottery, or no, in on the NHL Network talk, which is really nice to see. It's really cool. But I also agree with Heads Up Hockey that honestly this should be completely the 1 through 7 teams. I don't think.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
if it takes you 20 minutes to explain the lottery format, it's probably not the correct one to go for. But I was trying to count how many cards I saw that guy carrying as he walked down the hall. Like, is that 7 or 8?
But yeah, I mean, if you have a chance to win the Stanley Cup, you shouldn't have the chance to win the first overall pick.
Yeah, and the whole idea of what these play-in games actually are is confusing. Like, you think about, for example, the Sami Vatanen trade. If he plays in all of the play-in games, do those count towards the trade? Or like, where do those stats go in for a player's career stats? Like, they're not playoffs, they're not regular season. Do they just not?
Yeah, I don't know if it counts towards the trade, but I know that they're not technically playoff games. To super weird because, I mean, well, we should also clarify at this point that right now, the Devils are supposed to have 3 picks in this first round. Yeah. Whether or not that happens, I don't really think so, because I would be very surprised if Minnesota beat Vancouver. But at this point, it's 3 picks.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that if there are 0 play-in teams that win the lottery and move into the top 3, that means we get the Arizona pick because they won't have any opportunity to pick in the top 3. But as long as there's 1 play-in team that wins and jumps up to the top 3, we won't know about the Arizona pick until a couple months from now, which is just going to be infuriating for anyone who writes blogs about the Devils because you want some sort of certainty.
Yeah.
So yeah, if there are 0 play-in teams, we know we have at least that second.
But somebody in the Discord chat said that these stats do count towards playoff stats.
Oh, that's strange.
Yeah.
Because they've definitely said they're not playoff games. But I mean, the stats have to go somewhere, and that makes more logical sense to me than putting them in the regular season. But at the same time, if that's the case, these should probably count as playoffs, and we should probably get the Vancouver pick. But,
yeah. I will tweet out a GIF or GIF, however you pronounce it, of Assassin's Creed.
Also, thanks everyone for joining us. We have like 160 people on the stream right now. That's awesome.
Here's
What?
a look at the consensus top 10 prospects for the 2020
Holy hell.
NHL draft. There are 7 forwards, a goaltender,
Oh, man.
and 2 defensemen,
I haven't talked to
including Jake
160
Manners,
people
top-ranked
in-
American-born player. Rimouski forward
gosh knows
Alexei
how long.
Lafreniere heads the list at number 1 overall. As we welcome you back to the NHL draft.
Probably
Lottery
you
selection
saw me
zone.
when I was super
And the number of
sunburned, right?
prospects around the
Oh, yeah.
world looking
Yeah,
on.
that's what
was-
happens.
That was tough to watch.
Yeah. I just bring that up because I haven't been out of the house in a very long time.
Earlier, he told us how he's feeling heading into tonight's draft lottery results.
Yeah, for sure it's exciting. You know, I'm gonna have a pretty
So now the
good
benefit
idea
of this is that we don't have
of where I'm
the
gonna go
the
for sure, but,
projected
so
number one
the
pick
draft is
in the
gonna
studio,
come
so we
up
can't
still,
see
so, it's the lottery. It's
necessarily see his
just
hopes and
part of the
dreams getting
process, but,
absolutely
you know,
crushed
still
in
not
real
drafted,
time.
so,
Yeah, we won't be able to see the light behind his eyes die
Oh
as
my
he
gosh.
watches the Buffalo Sabres win the lottery.
a different
something.
lottery,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
you know, I'll
That
just,
whole Connor McDavid thing was
enjoy
brutal.
this
Like
time,
the sheer
with
amount
my
of
family,
airtime that was spent
but,
dissecting
we'll
the
wait,
look
Yeah.
from Edmonton
to see
one.
what happens.
I felt so
But,
bad for that
no,
kid.
for sure excited for this.
Oh
lottery.
man. Yeah, he seems to be doing pretty well right now, but still just
America looking on right now are excited at the possibility of getting
Oh, it's our friend
franchise
Eugene.
caliber player like Alexei Lafreniere. You can see all of them anxiously
Oh, yeah.
waiting here tonight with us. And joining me in studio now is Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly. Bill, we always enjoy this night.
Oh,
Things feel a
Bill
little
Daly.
bit different this time around, but
Let's
nonetheless,
go.
the anticipation and the nerves, you can
Okay,
feel it from the
try to count the amount of
virtually.
cards
Yeah,
on that
very,
desk.
different, but very exciting.
all I see is
It's,
block
the
of
first
white. Oh, here we go.
successful step of a return to play.
All right, well, why don't you get things started for us?
So,
All right, here we go.
Catherine, I already have an important development to announce. The fact that I was brought
Yep.
8 cards
8.
instead of 7.
Yep, 8. There it is.
Means that
Yep.
a participant in the qualifying round in the
Yep.
Stanley Cup playoffs
Cool.
has moved
Good
into
job.
the top
Good
3
job, NHL.
overall selection. So we'll see who that
At
is.
least it's not 9 cards.
At least it's not 9,
The
you know?
number 8 overall
We
selection
want Buffalo.
in the 2020 NHL draft belongs to the Buffalo Sabres.
So Buffalo's
Great.
new general
Cool.
manager Kevin Adams will be
good
selecting
news.
8
Yeah.
overall for a
So
Sabres
next we
team.
want Anaheim. This
Yeah.
is the big one.
9 straight seasons, Buffalo has selected
Well, at least
in
it's
the
early
top
this
8
time, you
in
know?
each of
Yeah.
the last
Find out
7
early.
times.
Last year was
Bill?
brutal.
Yeah.
The number 7 overall selection in the 2020 NHL draft belongs to the New
All right.
Jersey Devils.
All right,
That's
there you
fine.
go.
Tom
Number
Fitzgerald
7.
and the New Jersey Devils selected first overall last season, first overall in 2017, but they will pick 7th this year. This is a Devils franchise that finished the regular season in last place in the Metropolitan Division.
Super bummer. But that's fine.
That was the most likely result too, right?
Selection in the 2020 NHL draft
Statistics.
belongs
Anaheim?
Anaheim?
Yeah, okay.
There you go.
The Ducks have missed the playoffs for the 2nd straight season after making 6 straight appearances, but they made a fantastic pick with their only other number 6 overall draft pick, selecting Hampus Lindholm in 2012.
So who's it going to be?
to the number 5 overall.
I hope we see
selection in
LA.
the 2020 NHL draft belongs to Ottawa
Yeah.
Senators.
Wow, LA won.
General
Okay.
Manager Pierre Dorian and the Senators with the best odds for the number 1 overall pick. They dropped to number 5 with the team's own original selection for 2020.
I would.
Senators, remember,
It would be
they
really
still have
funny
a
if
chance
Ottawa
at the
had
top pick with
dropped
San Jose's
to both
first
4 and
rounder
5.
from Erik Karlsson's trade. That means the Los Angeles
That's good for them. They already have a really good
Kings
prospect
the
system
top
too. That's
Yeah.
gonna be
Robinson,
massive for them.
Luc Robitaille, they are enjoying this one at the moment. Bill.
And they got Turcotte last year and
The number
Kaliev.
4 overall selection in the 2020 NHL draft belongs to the Detroit Red Wings.
Interesting.
Detroit hoping
Wow.
for
Wow, they
the
got
number 1
boned.
overall
So
pick.
Ottawa
The
won
Red
too.
Wings ended
Yeah.
the regular season in last
Good for them.
place, but they will select
Do you think they'll tell us if
Hopefully
it's the San Jose pick or
Red Wings
not?
fans, there is a sign of things to come. The last
I don't
time
know.
the Red Wings had the number 4
Maybe in
overall
those,
pick, they chose their
in
general
that extra
manager
video?
and of
Yeah.
course, Hockey Hall
Yeah.
of Famer Steve Yzerman.
Wow, I hope this is gonna be
So we
huge.
know that
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Senators
if
and
the
a
team-
eliminated from
Well, it's probably
the
going to be a commercial break now.
qualifying round will
Yep.
select the top 3 spots at the 2020 NHL draft. We'll find out the order after this. Last year it was the Devils who won the draft.
It is the San Jose
lottery
pick
as
that
they
won,
selected
apparently,
American-born player
according to Dean in
Jack
chat.
Hughes.
Oh, wow.
The remaining general managers waiting and
The
looking
twist
on.
of the knife.
Pierre Dorian of
So
the
yeah,
Ottawa
this was the
Senators
most likely
and
result then,
Rob
right?
Wilkins
38
in
points
LA to
something
find out
percent.
who gets number
That's
1 after this.
yeah, that's kind of what we expected.
Yeah. we'll get a good player either way, but still, super bummer.
Yeah, once we see the top 3, we can pull up those top 15 lists again and take a look. But wow. So yeah, what do you think about that? The play-in team in the top 3, Ottawa and LA. That's huge for LA. That's going to really bump them up a year or 2 in the timeline.
Movie didn't work.
And Ottawa too. That's I do feel bad for Detroit, if I'm honest.
Yeah. I mean, how many times have we seen the team finish dead last, not get a single top 3 pick?
Yeah, like was the last time they actually got the pick Toronto?
Toronto, I think so.
Yeah, Austin Matthews.
Yeah.
Which is suspicious, if I'm honest. But yeah, I do feel bad because they definitely were just bad, right? There are teams that really try to be bad, and then there's the Detroit Red Wings this year.
Yeah.
Not that they tried to be good, but you know, that's just what the team was. But they're going to get a good player at 4, and I wonder if that frees them up to do something kind of spicy.
Now we just need to see. Well, I have no idea what's going to happen now with what the play-in team, which one it's going to be.
If it's 1, I'm going to flip out.
Well, I mean, yeah, but like who gets it?
Oh, Buffalo 2018, Rasmus Dahlin. Makes sense. Yeah, thanks for that.
I'm Tony Luffman inside the rink.
And here we go.
And drama building. Don't worry, we will have comprehensive.
Yeah, Chico in chat, knowing Yzerman, he's going to take 4th overall and turn it into the best player in the draft. I think that's it's not a bad take.
The Edmonton Oilers would like to select with their first pick Connor McDavid.
He's always been ahead of the grade.
So, in terms of just the odds, we can, you know, it's most likely Ottawa has the first pick, LA has the 2nd, and the play-in team has the 3rd. I'm curious if it actually shakes out like that. Because that's kind of how it went last year, right? Like when we had this commercial break after we know the Devils won into the top 3, we had the best odds, and then New York and Chicago. That's been our experience, at least.
Yeah.
Also, welcome everyone. We now have 340 people with us, which is amazing. So thanks for joining us. We're just waiting for the final 3 picks to be revealed. It's going to be LA, Ottawa, and a mystery team.
Dr. Jacob Hattenbeck representing his team, the Los Angeles Kings, and Kelly Cochran for the Ottawa Senators. So,
and after this, we're going to have the first responders duke it out in the back alley.
Okay, here we go.
Overall selection in the 2020 NHL
card looks like
belongs to the Ottawa Senators.
Wow.
So the Senators, who traded Erik Karlsson to San Jose in September 2018,
that's big.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
I'm liking this less and less as we go.
What a terrible system.
The last time the Senators had a top 3 pick was
Okay. Well, we hope it's Team H or whatever, you know.
Number 2. So, Bill, the Los Angeles Kings and a yet-to-be-determined team are remaining. It's time to reveal who has the number 1 pick in the draft.
The number 1 overall selection in the 2020 NHL draft.
I'm guessing LA.
Team yet to be
oh
determined,
my
coming
gosh.
from the qualifying round in the Stanley
Oh wow.
What a terrible system.
That's huge.
That's oh my gosh.
So yeah.
So none of the teams there got none of the player representatives or the team representatives there got the first pick.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. So the potential for some tomfoolery is still afoot. Man, this is almost too much.
We're going to talk to Bill Daly. We're going to catch up with Los Angeles Kings as well as we continue to make our way through this NHL.
Yeah, best sport, worst league in the chat.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Wow.
Interesting. Okay, so man, this is going to be a long summer. Trying to figure out like so many teams that could make this narrative even more interesting. Like you think about a team like Edmonton, Toronto, Pittsburgh.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, who thought this was a good idea? Who thought this?
Oh, I don't know anyone outside of the league that thought this was a good idea. Even people from play-in teams thought this was dumb.
unbelievably stupid, but that's the system that we have.
It's not just the ships.
Gosh. All right.
All right, let's get rid of this.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, this is too much. Wow, so that's huge. So mystery team from the
So that
play-in
just
rounds. LA takes the second pick, and Ottawa's back to third, which means Detroit's at 4, and then Ottawa again at 5. Well, what do you think about that, Ian?
I mean, it was the highest statistical probability of the Devils dropping down to 7. So I'm not upset about that. A little bummed, but it's fine. But like, wow, there's going to be a playoff caliber team that gets the first overall pick.
Yeah, I mean playoff caliber. Maybe with an asterisk or with air quotes or whatever, but yeah, that's incredible, and definitely what I would consider to be one of the worst case scenarios. Like obviously 3 play-in teams in the top 3 is takes the cake, but this almost seems too perfect, from a narrative standpoint for the NHL, that like the amount of momentum that goes into the play-in rounds now is probably higher than it was 30 minutes ago. Not that this was rigged, but just this is probably what they were hoping for. Like this is why they did this, right? To get one of those to get the play-in teams to have, I guess, higher stakes. Although, this might incentivize a couple teams to maybe take it a bit easier.
Yeah.
I don't know. And how does this work, right? So the teams that don't make it out of the play-in round, they each have equal odds to win that pick. They have 12.5% odds.
I think so.
Yeah.
Also, at the same time, this was absolutely maximum team chaos.
Yes, absolutely.
Complete team chaos outcome.
Man, I'm rattled. Okay, so the Devils are at 7. That's what matters right now. So let's take a look at your list, and then we'll take a look at my list. Who do you think has the potential to be there at 7?
Cool. So we now have an order. What's the order?
We have NHL, LA at 2, Ottawa at 3, Detroit at 4, Ottawa again at 5, and then it's Anaheim, New Jersey, and Buffalo.
Okay. Sorry, one more time so I can just type this out.
We have, for the first pick, the NHL mystery team.
Yeah.
And then the LA Kings.
Okay.
Then the Ottawa Senators.
Then Detroit.
Then
Ottawa.
And then Anaheim, New Jersey.
Okay. So I'm just trying to think this through. Think at this point the NHL team is going to take Lafreniere.
Yeah, you would have to think, right? Like I feel like the potential for a Byfield or a Stützle to go first overall probably is within the context of the bottom feeding teams. You're getting creative with it. I think if you're a Pittsburgh, you're like Carolina, Montreal, you're taking Lafreniere.
Yeah, especially Montreal. But LA, it gets super interesting. I think, they already have Turcotte and Kupari in their system already. I think they still go with Byfield.
Yeah, like I feel like Stützle would excel in. Gosh, yeah, I feel like Byfield would be the pick for like a heavier kind of Western team like that. Although they're definitely moving towards speed, but I'd have to think Byfield would go second to LA.
Ottawa, we know they're going to take a forward. I think they're going to go Stützle.
Yep.
Who are their top centers, by the way?
Oh gosh, is Batherson a center?
No, he's a winger, I think.
And they have White, Colin White.
Yeah. Logan Brown, but I think he's kind of.
He's in Michael McLeod territory.
Yeah, he hasn't developed as much as they'd like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Stützle could be a center though too.
Yeah. So I mean, that puts Detroit in a position to be able to draft a defenseman.
Yeah. Yeah, Detroit at 4, like you could be looking at, I mean, depending on preference, that could be a Marco Rossi, a Lucas Raymonds, a Drysdale, a Sanderson. I think Detroit would definitely be one of those teams that would take a shot on Sanderson, like you said earlier. Yeah, it basically breaks down at number 4.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, jeez. I can't believe that just happened.
That's wild.
So we're stalling, but
Yeah.
I still think that in my third tier, we're definitely going to be we're going to have players available there. I think Raymond is going to drop. I do see Rossi being taken high, so I'm going to guess a combination of. Well, then Anaheim, who are they going to pick too? I see Anaheim picking a defenseman as well.
Well,
to be
yeah,
honest.
because they've had a really good run on forwards recently. Like you think of like Trevor Zegras, for example, and they have all those other guys that sound like superheroes.
Yeah,
like Troy Terry, and so forth. I think it's definitely possible that Anaheim takes a defenseman, and even if Detroit gobbles up, a Drysdale or a Sanderson, I could see either one fitting into their system as well.
Yeah, and we know that Anaheim has scouted Helge Grans, a defenseman from Sweden.
That would be a hell of a swing.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they're going to pick him at 6.
Yeah,
but they're and when I say they've scouted him, like of course all teams have scouted him, but Bob Murray and the assistant general manager for Anaheim we saw him in person.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So basically, if we're working off your list, it's reasonable for the Devils to have at their disposal someone like, I would say less likely, a Jamie Drysdale, Alexander Holtz, Cole Perfetti, and maybe even a Marco Rossi. Do you think that's fair?
Yes, I think that's fair.
Clayton on YouTube was late and doesn't know who won. The first overall pick went to a play-in team, so a mystery NHL team. Second went to LA, and third went to Ottawa, and Detroit slipped all the way to 4th. Okay, yeah, I think that's an interesting group of players to have, I think, because you have like Alexander Holtz, who has...
Holtz is going to be available.
Yeah. Who would be your preference at 7, assuming that kind of the usual suspects get taken up early? Like not considering Stützle, Byfield, Lafreniere. Who's your best case scenario?
I think this is definitely a organizational need, but also Holtz has such a high ceiling as well. He would be exactly what this team needs.
Yeah, like you could strap him to Jack Hughes' side for the next 8 years, and I think that could get really exciting.
Hughes, Holtz, and Foote.
Yeah, like that's some size. Not, Holtz isn't a slouch either. Yeah, I wonder if Rossi slips down to 7 too.
Yeah,
like I wonder if the size thing and the fact that there are teams that you could definitely say would need defensemen in the next couple spots just above New Jersey. Yeah.
So while this is not worst case scenario, I do feel like we need to not discuss it, but just let it be known. The Arizona first round pick is contingent on being a top 3 protected pick.
Yeah. So that we don't know about the Arizona pick right now, or the Vancouver pick.
Mm-hmm.
What we do know is that even if Arizona loses the play-in round, they only have a 12.5% chance to win, which admittedly is higher than the chance we had to win, which is a bit concerning. But yeah,
unbelievably stupid.
Even if they were to lose, the odds are in our favor to have that. So I don't have the math in front of me to know if they lost the play-in round, what that pick would be sitting at. But I would expect it to be, like Aren't they at
11?
like 10 or 11 or 12?
Yeah, I think 11.
Yeah. Interesting. Chico says, I think the Sens gobble Rossi with number 3, unless Quentin Byfield falls. I don't know. I think Stützle's a tough one to say no to. And he might be able to grab Rossi at 5. I'm not sure. There's so many unknowns here. And that's basically what you were saying earlier, right? Like this third tier is so subjective at this point. And I'm pretty sure if we go to my top 15, I'm not sure there's any difference. Yeah, I think my Drysdale is 1 pick higher than yours. But in reality, like we're going to be getting one of those third tier players, right? Like maybe Lucas Raymond, although I suspect not. A Marco Rossi, Jamie Drysdale, Alexander Holtz, or a Perfetti, if you prefer. Man, this is unbelievable. I can't believe that happened.
So weird. Disappointing, frustrating, but got a 7th overall pick.
Yeah, it's nothing to shake a stick at.
Yeah.
You hope the Arizona pick doesn't make it all the way to 1. I saw someone earlier in chat say that we need to lawyer up and get that pick on a technicality, which I fully support. We could probably run a fundraiser for that at this point. And I mean, we have a lawyer in training on the stream with us. So
where?
I think combined we have a full law degree, right? We're at
so.
that point in your education where we could basically, I mean, they're 2 different law degrees, so that might get complicated, but I'm sure we could come up with something. Oh man, I don't like this at all.
No. I mean, we'll still get, one of like Raymond, Rossi, Holtz, or Perfetti.
Mm-hmm.
But jeez.
All of those are potential top line players too.
Yeah.
Right? I'd say every single one of them. And Drysdale does have top pairing potential as well. Although, he might top out as one of those tweeners, like a really good number 3. But those are all very big needs for the Devils, right? Like we need talent at every position at the moment. So, it's not the worst case. Picking 9 looks a lot different than picking 7th, I think, based on both of our lists. But man, I can't believe it. It's almost too good to be true for the NHL.
Yeah, it's not. Honestly, it's not a good look.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter though. But and could you imagine a team like Toronto, Edmonton, Pittsburgh being in that position to pick?
Yeah. I'm going to tell you, there are going to be some very conflicted fans in Montreal tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at their playoff series. Who are they up against? The Sens? Or no, sorry, the Pittsburgh Penguins?
I think so.
Yeah. There's also the question of what happens if the play-ins don't actually occur, right?
Yeah, because it's not like Austin Matthews got diagnosed with COVID. you know? So.
Yeah. Wow. Well, what a wild ride that was. I'm not sure I liked it, but it's fun to be on the stream with you.
Oh yeah.
As we kind of wind down, any final thoughts for the process?
Just weird. Just weird. It should have been the 7 teams that aren't playing. But
agreed.
That's besides the point. Absolute worst case scenario is Arizona, and then we get Arizona's unprotected first round pick next year.
Mm-hmm.
So could see some optimism from there.
Yeah.
But I mean, still we're in a good position regardless.
Yeah. Question in chat from John. Do you guys see similarities between Ty Smith and Jamie Drysdale?
Not quite. I mean, they're both very good skating defensemen. I think Drysdale is a bit speedier on his skates than Smith. But also Smith, the big question with Smith was his offensive upside, whereas I don't feel like that's an issue with Drysdale.
No.
But Smith also has a very solid defensive game, whereas Drysdale has work to do on his defensive game. But if you break it down, I mean, one of the not tricks, but like one of the annoying things that lawyers can do, or law students can do in an analysis, is to zoom out and broaden. So they're both very good skating defensemen. But the differences are, I think, kind of significant after that.
Yeah, like I think what you said is fair. They're both very mobile, and I'd say mobile in similar ways, although not necessarily exactly. Like Jamie Drysdale's kind of four-way mobility is really interesting in a way that I think is probably above where Ty Smith is at. But Ty Smith's defensive game, especially after this last season of development, is definitely above where Drysdale is currently. But Drysdale's offensive potential is definitely above where Ty Smith was, and probably is, to be honest. So that's interesting. It's funny because, should Arizona win the lottery, assuming that they don't win their play-in rounds and they happen to win the first overall pick because Taylor Hall, Arizona is one of those teams that has the potential to take a dive next season. Depending on what happens with Taylor Hall. Obviously, Lafreniere makes them better up front, but they have skill in the forward position. What they don't have necessarily is reliable defense or reliable goaltending. They definitely had injuries at that position. So the thought of an Arizona unprotected first next season is interesting. And same with Vancouver, right? Like, should they not make the play-in? Vancouver's another one of those teams that has a lot of question marks next season, especially if they aren't able to re-sign Jacob Markstrom, who's been like a really good player for them.
Yeah.
So they're another team that, like, having an unprotected first next season is also interesting because there's lots of potential there. And those could be 2 lottery tickets, albeit not necessarily the best lottery tickets, but it definitely counts. My issue with that scenario is that it extends our timeline, right? Because one of the biggest concerns I had about the idea of a draft in June before the play-in rounds and before the playoffs was the fact that you weren't able to trade for roster players. And the idea of us having 3 first-round picks and having the 7th, getting a good player, and then trading those other first-round picks for NHL-ready talent now could really boost the timeline of the Devils, right? Like to fill in some of the gaps, maybe get a top 4 defenseman, maybe get Kevin LeBanc again, because we're going to start that hype train. If having those unprotected picks next season could be good, but it means that we can't trade them now, which means that we're going to pick at 7. We don't have any seconds, and we're basically standing pat for another season. And there's not really going to be much we're going to be able to do other than overpay for, a free agent, which I don't see us doing. So that's the trade-off for me. The unprotected first would be potentially very valuable next season, but it means next season is going to look, it's going to look potentially pretty rough.
Yeah, because
I don't think people are going to be happy about.
Yeah, because if Arizona gets Lafreniere, for example, they will be a better team, no doubt. He plays in the NHL. He makes an immediate impact. They will be a better team because of it, and that'll affect the draft position. But you do mention something really interesting about the goaltending situation, and Vancouver is a team that I kind of view as a potential implosion candidate.
Yes.
Because we, for the exact reasons that you mentioned, we know Pettersson is going to take a step forward, or he's still going to be a very talented, effective player. Besser, we'll see, but he won't be injured next year. Hughes probably going to take a step forward, if we're being honest. But I think JT Miller kind of overplayed a little bit, so he'll have I think he's going to have a little bit of a regression next year. But the big question is in net with Markstrom. What's going to happen? If he stays, how stable is that going to be? How stable is his performance going to be? And with Arizona, I mean, Kemper was putting up, I don't want to say Vezina, but like near Vezina
You
numbers.
can say Vezina. I feel like that's applicable.
And then what Ronta was performing really well too. And then then he got injured too, right? Ronta got injured. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. I mean, there is an allure. To be honest, I mean, there is an allure to having one, if not two, potentially unprotected first round picks for the next draft year, even though, like you said, it kicks the can down the road further. But also it helps that next year is looking to be very defensively heavy.
Yeah, there's lots of very interesting names on there, and some last names that Devils fans might be familiar with.
Yeah.
Right? Brant Clark, who plays for the Barrie Colts in the OHL, could be a top 3 pick.
Yep. Then there's Luke Hughes.
Yes, who we
another defenseman.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, just such an incredible name. He should go top 5 at this point. I mean, a lot happens, but there's a defenseman in the USHL. I think he's playing for Chicago, named Owen Power.
Oh yeah. He's getting shafted by Hockey Canada. So he should have been one of the people invited to the U17 camp this summer, but because he's going the NCAA route, Hockey Canada doesn't tend to like that.
Yeah.
So you tend not to get invited to things once you commit. But he's another good one. Very top heavy in terms of defensemen for next draft. And again, though, that kicks the can not only another season, but if you're looking at high-end defensive prospects, they tend to take a bit longer too. So, the timeline just starts to stretch out. Obviously, that's not in our control. So there are positives and negatives to that. But yeah, some extra lottery tickets would be nice. Although, like I said, I think my preference would be to pick at 7 and trade at least one of the other first-round picks if we happen to have all 3.
But in all sincerity, I am happy with getting 7th.
Yeah. So a couple of people asking how we're feeling about that. I think 7 was exactly what I expected. Right? It was the most statistically likely. And we were just looking at our top 15 lists, and you're looking at a player like Alexander Holtz, Jamie Drysdale, potentially a Marco Rossi, Cole Perfetti. You're going to get one of those people unless things get really crazy in the top 6. All of those have the potential to be top line or top pairing.
Yeah.
So
real quick, a tweet from Elliot Friedman, quote, "If for whatever reason the play-in cannot be completed," so I guess if the season is canceled or whatnot, "the remaining bottom 8 teams will have a 1 in 8 shot at the top selection."
That's interesting. Yeah. 12.5%. Yeah, that's let me pull up the standings. Because I think there are going to be some interesting names there.
What does he mean by the remaining bottom 8 teams?
So I assume those who would not have normally made the playoffs.
Okay.
So we're looking at the Rangers, the Habs, so forth. Yeah, interesting. Any other thoughts? Yeah, I'm kind of in shock, to be honest.
Yeah, this was weird.
It's a strange time just in general, with COVID-19 and everything else. But this just makes it feel even stranger because this is not the sort of thing that would ever happen. And it's hard to kind of get a read on it. I think where we ended up is fine. I'm a bit frustrated at the idea that we won't know about the Arizona pick until we don't know when we'll know about it. Same with Vancouver. Because it's one thing to know you have the 7th pick and you might have these trade trips, but it's another thing to know, okay, we're going to have this extra stuff to play with. We can start to look about trading down and filling out, the 2nd or 3rd rounds, trading for Kevin LeBanc, whatever the case may be. That's frustrating. I think 7 is fine. It's the other stuff that you're just like, I don't need to think about that.
Yeah, and we'll even see what happens with the league. I mean, Tampa Bay just had a bunch of players test positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they just opened their practice facility. So honestly, a lot can happen over the course of 2 weeks.
Yep.
So we'll even see if there is a could you imagine? I mean, okay, this is kind of like the bargaining stage, I guess, of it.
Okay.
But could you imagine the reaction if the season is canceled, there's a redraw, and the Devils get the first pick?
So I definitely did think about this.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah. Again, definitely the bargaining stage of what just happened. But
yep. I was hoping, because you do think about the possibility that the playoffs or play-ins or whatever you're calling it are canceled, especially when we started to hear about certain players or a certain amount of players testing positive for COVID-19. And I selfishly was hoping that this would happen before anything was canceled, because I don't want there to be like a Crosby-esque, league-wide draw or something, because that's, you can understand the reasoning for it, but I don't think that's proper. I was just hoping that this happened before anything else. But, yeah. One last question I saw in the chat was, future plans for the podcast. Like we said, kind of on the top, we've been taking it a bit easy because, there's a lot of other stuff going on right now that seems a lot more important than hockey. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter at NJ Devils Details. We'll definitely talk about putting out some more podcast episodes over the course of the summer. Who knows what that's going to look like, or if there's going to be any hockey to talk about. But I know Ian and I are both working on some articles for the website. So if you haven't actually checked out the website, it's devilsinthedetails.net. And we put up some content from time to time. And we both usually hang out in the official Reddit Devils Discord. So if you're curious about wasting massive amounts of time talking to people about hockey, highly suggest that as well. All right. Anything else you want to say before we kick off?
One last question that was asked in the chat about factoring in for team need, and top six factoring in for team need. And I'm not sure if I'm going to answer this too well, just because I think if LA had the third pick, I could absolutely see them picking Drysdale. But now that they have the second, they're going to go with either Byfield or Stützle, and I'm going to be super surprised. Detroit needs a center, so I can see them picking Rossi, if we're being honest here. I don't see them picking Lundell that high. So I can't give an answer to that specific question in detail, just because I'm still trying to figure out what the heck just happened. But we know that LA has a very strong prospect pool with two very strong centers, and likely, if they go BPA, another strong center, maybe move Kupari to the wing or whatever. Ottawa has a very strong group of young defensemen. Detroit needs centers. Who are the centers that they drafted? Oh gosh, what's his name?
Joe Veleno.
They drafted Veleno, and also Rasmussen. That's his name.
Oh yeah,
Rasmussen.
the big guy, right?
Yeah, the big guy. So he's been good so far. They got Zadina. They got Sider. I think they need more forwards. I mean, they need everybody. So I think they're
like us, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're going to go BPA. Then there's Ottawa again. I still think they're going to go two forwards with this pick, to be quite honest, these two picks. And Anaheim kind of needs everybody, except goalie.
Yeah, I could honestly see LA taking a defenseman as well. Like you think about, Turcotte and some of the other guys that they have at forward. Other than like Bjornfoot, I'm not aware of an up and coming defensive prospect in their system.
Jeez, I'm drawing a blank here.
I think someone like Jamie Drysdale could be really interesting to them, because I know they are trying to pivot more to like a speed game, moving on from the Doughty and Kopitar and Brown era. I don't know. I think there's potential for that for sure.
Yeah. But then that comes to us.
Yeah.
who that is. I do think it ultimately is going to end up being some choice of Raymond, Holtz, or Perfetti. Maybe Sanderson. I don't know. I see LA. I see Anaheim doing something weird there. That's just a gut feeling.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
So I mean, honestly, we're going to get a top line potential player.
Yeah.
So,
and you think about what happens every year. There's one swing in the top, 6 or so. All it takes is for one player to be taken, a couple spots earlier than we think, and all of a sudden you have a top 5 player fall into your lap at number 7. So there's definitely the potential for something kind of interesting to happen. But regardless, we're getting a good player, and it's going to be a long summer of mock drafts at this point.
Yeah. And one last thing to note before we, I guess we call this a stream, from Bob McKenzie and Frank Saravalli, the team that won, the team, quote unquote, that won was placeholder Team E, which had a 2.5% chance of winning.
Wow. That's just rubbing salt in the wound at this point.
It is, but it needed to be shared.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, this has been a lot of fun. The craziness aside, it's always good to do these. We're going to be, like I said, putting out, some articles over the summer. We've written a couple already. So if you haven't checked out the website, it's devilsindedetails.net. You can follow us at NJ Devils Details. Thank you so much for spending time with us. This has been a lot of fun. The turnout was far greater than I think either of us expected.
We've had a lot of people here.
Potentially combined. So yeah, really appreciate you spending this time with us. All right. Take it easy, everyone.
Yep. Thanks again, guys.